President Volodymyr Zelensky is hoping a peace summit will return the world's attention to Ukraine's war with Russia. But Russia's not invited, and some major world leaders aren't coming. What chance of success does it have? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. A peace summit launched by Ukraine looks in trouble even before it's begun. President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked global leaders to attend the talks in Switzerland in June, but without much success so far. You see, the US President, Joe Biden, is planning to skip the gathering. Russia hasn't even been invited, and the leaders of China, India and Brazil may not turn up. That's left EU ministers scrambling to find a solution. With Israel's war raging in Gaza and Russian and Ukrainian troops locked in what looks like a near stalemate, Kyiv is desperate to keep world attention on the conflict at home. Well, what can it hope to achieve if Moscow isn't there? And why hold a summit if some of the world's most influential players aren't on board? We'll bring in our guests in a moment after this report by Imogen Kimber.
A peace conference on the war in Ukraine is set to be held in Switzerland in June. But, along with some high-profile names, Russia won't be there. President Volodymyr Zelensky wants global leaders to back a 10-point plan for peace. That includes measures on nuclear safety, food security, alleged Russian war crimes, and a withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. The US says it will be represented, but possibly not, by President Joe Biden. Zelensky says his absence would benefit Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I think the peace summit needs President Biden, and other people who are looking at the response of the United States of America need him there. If he's not present, it'll be just like applauding Putin, personally applauding and doing so standing.
Zelensky also appealed to Chinese President Xi Jinping to attend. But Beijing says it would support a conference that includes Russia, although it may send junior officials. India and Brazil say they might do the same. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and other European leaders are expected to join. More than half of the 90 countries likely to attend are European. Zelensky has also been granted at least $3 billion worth of financial support, along with 30 F-16 fighter jets from Belgium, Spain and Sweden. But he says his country needs more. Russia is continuing to push deeper into Kyiv and Donetsk, stretching the Ukrainian army. Zelensky says the reason Russia was not invited to the talks is because Moscow doesn't want peace. Russia says it's open to talks, but has also criticised the summit, saying presidential elections in Ukraine are overdue.
Of course we realize that the legitimacy of the incumbent head of Ukrainian state has expired. I think that one of the aims of the forthcoming conference in Switzerland is such that the Western community, the sponsors of the Kyiv regime, could confirm the legitimacy of the acting head of state, or rather already non-acting.
Switzerland says the talks are only the beginning of a peace process. But some people are questioning whether that can start without the involvement of the main adversaries and major world leaders. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guest to unpack all of these issues. We have joining us in Moscow, Andrei Fedorov. He's a former Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia and now the Chairman of the Fund for Political Research and Consulting. In London, Domitilla Sagramoso is a Senior Lecturer in Conflict and Security at King's College London. She's currently working on a book on the complex Russian-Ukrainian relationship since 1991. And in Kyiv, Peter Zalmayev, the Executive Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative and a political commentator. Welcome to the show. If I could start with Peter. So, is this really a peace conference when Russia isn't even invited?
Well, indeed, Russia is not invited, but at the same time, Russia had sent all sorts of signals that it did not want to be invited and it did not plan to participate from the get-go. So that's just something that we have to understand, you know. Also, I think we already beat expectations. Then, 70 countries had agreed so far to participate, and President Zelensky is now communicating that after his efforts to drum up support for this event, the figure, I'm quoting him, is now closer to 90. I don't think that we should put too many expectations on this highly symbolic, very important event, but once again, symbolic event. Nothing will be decided there, probably. And I think Zelensky's overarching goal is to send a signal that it's not just Western countries who are backing Ukraine, but a sizable chunk of the so-called global South, for the hearts and minds of which there is this vicious battle now with Ukraine and its Western allies on the one hand, and Russia, China, and some other countries battling for the hearts and minds of the global South. So I think that if we do get a sizable portion of Latin American countries, African, Asian countries, that will be a victory of sorts for Ukraine.
Okay, interesting that you used the word symbolic there. Let me take this question to Andrei in Moscow. What is the symbolism that is likely to be seen in Moscow? Will it be seen as an attempt to rally the world against Russia?
First of all, it's not a symbolic event. It's an important event from many points of view, and of course a lot will depend how many countries will be present and on what level. Personally, I don't exclude that President Biden can jump from Italy to Switzerland for a couple of hours, speak at this conference, and continue to Los Angeles. So the most important thing for Russia, and why this conference is disturbing Russia, is because Zelensky is trying to create a rather wide political platform for support of his peace formula. Unfortunately, I have to say very openly that a Russian peace formula formulated by President Putin cannot gather more than 5 countries behind. So, of course, Zelensky will play later on this fact that a rather broad spectrum of countries are supporting his point of view. And, of course, it's not the end. It's just somewhere in the middle, this process, because at this stage, both Ukraine's approach and Moscow's approach are totally 100% different, and there is no bridge between them. And unfortunately, at this moment, no one can build up this bridge.
Okay, interesting. Domitilla, ultimately, then, is this really not a peace conference, but rather a conference to rally countries around Ukraine's negotiating position so that when at some point, hopefully, peace talks start, that Ukraine feels it's starting with much stronger global backing? Is that really the point of this conference?
Yes, I think that's one element of this conference, besides sort of sharing with as many countries as possible the Ukrainian position, the Ukrainian point of view. So trying to rally them behind and to find points of agreement. So the more agreement is found among countries on the points that have been put forward by the Zelensky peace formula, the stronger the position is of Ukraine eventually in a more direct process of negotiations with Russia. So on the one hand is to show the broad support that this kind of Ukrainian peace initiative can have. And as was noted, that it is not limited only to the countries that are directly now supporting Ukraine globally, but also that it includes countries in the global south, potentially China, India, Brazil, who, even if they are not going to send their top leaders, they might send representatives and in a way show their support to many of the points in this initiative. So I think there are a variety of elements there, and I don't think it should be seen only as a symbolic event. I think it also has a very strong sort of political message that could be sent.
Interesting. I want to go back to Andrei in Moscow and ask this question, because you mentioned that this is not symbolic, this is an important event. But if we don't see a lot of key world leaders showing up, might that send the opposite message about how interested the world is in supporting Ukraine? How important is it, do you think, that the number of world leaders?
No, it's not very important. First of all, because there will be any kind of final document which should be signed by world leaders, etc., etc. It's a first of all a conference which will discuss different sides of the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And it doesn't matter, by the way, if China will be on the level of foreign minister or deputy foreign minister, because the most important for Ukraine and for many other countries, how many flags we will see. How many flags we will see. And the most important, of course, is the understanding. And I think that this conference will try to make a kind of understanding if any real peace talks are possible or not. This is the most important thing. Because, as I mentioned earlier, at this stage, positions are totally different, and no one can sit on the table. Unfortunately, both Kyiv and Moscow are rejecting the idea to start negotiations from blank page. And this is, by the way, idea of Chinese, that the best solution is to start negotiations from blank page, to remove today's existing demands from every side, and to try to find some common language, some points of agreements, and to see where is totally the disagreements remains.
All right, let me go to Peter. Peter, what does then, do you think, represent success for this conference? Do you agree with Andrei there? Is it the number of flags? Is it the number of leaders? Is it commitment of support? What would you look at in this conference and say, yeah, it ticked the box or it didn't?
Yeah, I think that the figure is very important. You know, the more the merrier, as they say. Yes, Biden's non-show, which we don't have a confirmation of, will be sad. We cannot rule it out. And President Zelensky has kind of reacted quite emotionally already. He said Vladimir Putin would be applauding if Biden didn't show up. I'm not sure if we should go that far, but I understand the emotion of our president. It won't shatter this event or its importance. When I say symbolic, it does not, I don't mean to diminish its importance, you know, in its symbolism. It's a first of such kind. And then don't forget that it would lead, hopefully in the spring, in the fall, to a meeting in Saudi Arabia, where Russia does plan to attend. So this could be a stepping stone. So yes, I think overall the figure is very important. And when we talk about any other alternative plans that Vladimir Putin is now proposing, we have to be very, very wary of what's at stake. And I think Western leaders understand that it's like negotiating with a snake who knows nothing but to bite you. We have precedents of Aleppo, when Russia was bombarding Aleppo on behalf of its client Bashar Assad, and there was supposed to be negotiation going on. Same thing in 2015, you know, as Putin claimed he was ready to negotiate, he was bombarding cities in the Donbass. Same thing now. He's talking about a peace plan, he's talking about peace talks, at the same time directing direct hits on civilian infrastructure in Kharkiv, essentially trying to follow the example he set in Aleppo, trying to destroy that city, or failing that, make the residents of this million-strong city evacuate. That is exactly what's happening. We have to be very wary of these peace proposals by Vladimir Putin.
Let me jump in there, Peter, and ask this question. The line from Russia we've heard at times is that they've also had strikes launched from Ukraine onto Russian territory, onto non-military installations, at least in one case, an apartment block being hit with civilians dying, that Russia blamed on Ukraine. Is it not a case of both sides trying to undermine the other's military position so that they go into peace talks with the upper hand?
Well,
briefly,
it is
Peter.
more of a case. Yeah. I'll just say that, Vladimir Putin also claimed that Ukraine was behind this, ISIS ordered attack on Crocus City Hall in Moscow a couple of months ago. So it does not really prevent Russian propaganda. Any sort of notions of decency did not prevent them from inventing wild conspiracy theories. Same thing with their accusation that Ukraine is targeting civilian infrastructure there. They are just inventing alternative informational reality. Ukraine did never recognize that, and there's high probability that Russia itself instigated and orchestrated that attack on that apartment block in Belgorod.
Andrei, I'm going to come back to you, give you a chance to weigh in on that, and also ask the question, if you can address it, of the likelihood that this leads into a meaningful sort of next round of talks in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else?
First of all, it's absolutely not clear what does this mean, conference in Saudi Arabia, because from Russian side, the comment is that we didn't hear about these proposals, we don't know what is this. The place is not so important. The problem is the content. As I said, at today's stage, positions are totally different, and the question is what we are searching for. Are we searching for peace treaty, which will fix the borders, new borders between Russia or Ukraine, or we are searching for peace agreement, which will not fix the borders, but which will be a kind of temporary solution. For example, like it's between Russia and Japan. We don't have, for decades, we don't have peace treaty, but we have certain agreements, etc. So this is the main question. And the question is from Russian side, is West, not Ukraine, if West will be ready to recognize new Russian borders. This is the key issue. Without recognition from the West of new Russian borders, Putin will not go to any conference.
Let me put a critical question to you too as well, Andrei, if I may. From the Ukrainian perspective, the question is very simple. Russia should expect the international borders and international law.
It's theoretically yes, but Russia will not recognize the existing borders of Ukraine. And Russia is insisting that Ukraine and the West should recognize current realities and maybe future realities, which means that one of the main goals of this special military operation is, of course, to have control over the whole Ukrainian territory of the whole country.
Domitilla, is there, realistically speaking, much incentive for either side to really engage in serious discussions before both sides really reach a point where they're convinced militarily on the ground that this is a stalemate which cannot be changed?
I think we haven't reached this point, which we usually call a hurting stalemate. I think that from the Russian point of view, there is a perception that now they're in a stronger position militarily. They've advanced on several fronts, as we know, to the north of Kyiv, also in areas around the Donbass. They're putting pressure around the areas of Zaporizhia. So I think the Russians probably feel that now is a moment where they can exert more pressure and advance further, and potentially, if they enter negotiations, get substantial concessions from Ukraine. The Ukrainians, in turn, have had a very difficult time. As we know, they haven't received the necessary equipment, ammunition. They have not been able to hit effectively inside Russian territory because of the constraints that have been imposed by some of the countries that are providing aid to Ukraine, in particular the United States, but also Germany. So they have faced a few setbacks on the front lines, and they're in a very delicate position. They're now waiting to get additional military support from the West, and that also includes the famous F-16s, which should allow Ukraine to better control its airspace and challenge some of the Russian sort of air operations. But it's difficult to see how this is going to pan out. So Ukrainians have more to gain if they wait, and in the couple of months they receive a more substantial amount of Western military equipment. So there is a bit of a window of opportunity where Russia might press for negotiations if it knows that it's going to get all the concessions that it wants. And these include not only issues around the acceptance of the new so-called borders, but also that, for example, Ukraine remains neutral, that there is some form of demilitarization. These are all elements that Ukraine is certainly not ready to accept. And I have a sense that Ukrainians, despite the challenges, are still ready to continue fighting. And there is hope probably that if the West provides additional material and allows it to hit inside Russia, especially on the neighboring areas, that then, it's going to be in a better position to engage in negotiations.
That's a key point, Domitilla. Let me take it to Kyiv and ask Peter. With the indications coming from the West that we have been hearing recently about the talk about maybe releasing some of the restrictions on how Ukraine may use its hardware, with the end of that pause we saw of supplying Ukraine with weapons from some of the major backers, does that all of that really create more of an incentive for Ukraine to wait and try harder on the ground before it really engages in a diplomatic or political process?
Well, no one is under any illusion that Ukraine will be able to stage another counteroffensive at this point. I think at this point, the goal is to make any further advances on the part of the Russian army into Ukraine's territory too costly, too onerous for Putin to contemplate their continuation. And yes, Ukraine's ability to hit deep inside Russia's territory, to hit military targets, that would be a significant boon. But once again, let's not expect any kind of Wunderwaffe, any kind of miracle weapon or miracle solution if that happens. Russia has been actually able to neutralize a lot of the American-made munition, including HIMARS rockets and ATACMS and Excaliburs, by jamming, essentially. So we constantly have to be updating and finding new solutions, and Ukraine is already doing it on its own. Some of its drones now can reach as deep as 2,000 kilometers into Russia's territory. So that may be part of the solution. But once again, there's no single silver bullet in all of this. It has to be a concerted effort. And the West has to stop being so concerned about Vladimir Putin's red lines. Vladimir Putin crossed all red lines when he decided to go against the international world order. And the West should stop worrying about any of Vladimir Putin's threats or concerns.
Let me take a point to Andrei in Moscow and say, also looking at what's happening on the battlefield and the ground with Russia recently having made advances, does Russia have more of an incentive to keep going and see how far it can go before it will commit itself in a serious sort of peace negotiation or political process?
It's quite a rhetoric question, because since the beginning of the year, the Russian army took under its control only 660 square kilometers, which is not a lot, because, for example, the territory of Kharkov is the city, not without suburbs, is 350 square kilometers. The question is,
you don't think, Andrei, that maybe Russian commanders might think they can go further?
They're thinking, of course, that they need to go further, but Kharkov has quite a serious defense line near its borders, because there was no defense line or Ukrainian defense line near the Russian border. The main question is about possible use of US, UK, France missiles towards Russian territory, deep into Russian territory. And it was not by chance Putin yesterday mentioned that some countries should think about the current situation. And experts today, many experts today commented that he meant London as a possible strike back. So we are standing on the very dangerous edge of the situation. And it's not Kharkov, it's not Donbass. We are entering the situation when strategic strikes from both sides could turn this war into European war even more.
Domitilla, there was a reference to the global south in this discussion. Are we about to see other countries in the global south perhaps launch their own initiatives? There's been some talk about China and Brazil putting together their own events or initiatives or conferences.
Well, we know that the Chinese have been promoting alternative peace proposals, but so far they haven't really produced much results. I think what we need to bear in mind is that there are countries such as China in particular that could really potentially exert pressure on Russia to compromise, and that would be really very important. But I really don't see at this stage any other countries from the so-called global south being effective in promoting a platform of negotiations. I think the only country that so far had succeeded in reaching or in brokering agreements around the grain deal was Turkey. And that eventually didn't really succeed because it was interrupted by Russia last year. And the problem, to a certain extent, was resolved because Ukrainians were able to dislodge the naval presence of Russia in that area and to continue exporting through the Black Sea, through the areas that they're still controlling. So I think that it's very difficult to see that a proposal that comes from the Global South can really have an impact. I think what is relevant, if we consider the Global South, is the fact that many of these countries could align and support many of the points in the Zelensky peace agreement, and that includes issues.
Right, sorry to cut you off. I'll let you finish the thought very, very briefly.
Yes, I just would like to say that there are a few elements in the peace agreement that could get the support, and these include issues around the question of food security, around nuclear safety, around humanitarian issues. And also a very important point is the question of recognition of the internationally recognized border.
Right.
So this is a point where we could see support from the Global South.
All right, I think we've got about a minute left. So I'm going to try and give 30 seconds each to both Peter and Andrei. Peter, a final thought, and to what extent what happens next depends not only the position of China, as Domitilla was explaining, but also obviously the United States and the relationship between the two, very briefly.
Well, very briefly, once again, I think it's really up to the West to decide that it's really its own war. It's not just a war of Russia against Ukraine or in defense of Ukraine's borders, etc. No, it's a civilizational fight. And it's up to the West to step in or not. The West's failure in Ukraine will have significant repercussions for the entire world.
All right. And Andrei, I'll give you a final thought in 30 seconds.
Despite all the peace efforts, we are standing in front of the new stage of confrontation and new stage of moving towards the war beyond the borders of Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, a worrying thought. Let's hope that that peace prevails and wiser thinking prevails on all sides. Thank you very much to our guests, Andrei Fedorov, Domitilla Sagramoso, and Peter Zalmayev. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.